My name is Allison Meg. I am the Sexual and Gender Diversity Coordinator in the Center for Student Diversity. We are very happy to put on this Building Trans Community series with Jonas from the Career Center, Mike from the Counseling Center, and then the CSD. To kick us off, Charlotte is here from Trans Maryland. And as Charlotte said earlier, they don't have slides because the information they're about to share is changing all the time. So be sure that you're taking good notes, asking questions, all that good stuff. Again, thank you all for being here. Please feel free to get food as you're listening to the talk. Just do so quietly. And we will have time at the end for a couple quick announcements from Mike and I for upcoming programs. Sound good? All right.
Hello, everyone. I am Charlotte Hoffman, and I am the Policy Director with Trans Maryland. And I am here today to talk to you about how the world is going to shit and how we can maybe deal with that. And so I was at Free State Justice for a while, and there I tried to sort of put in a lot of the sort of basic protections that we now have for queer folk and trans folk, specifically in Maryland. And then I moved to the National Center for Trans Equality, which a hot second ago changed its name to Advocates for Trans Equality because it merged with the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, or TILDEF, which was headquartered up in New York City. Because what's better than two nonprofits? One extra big nonprofit that smooshes two of them together into one. So I was doing the federal work, but now it's like maybe the federal work isn't going to go anywhere for a while because there's a Republican trifecta and they're being incredibly hostile. So let's defend things on the state level. But hey, Maryland is actually like pretty good when it comes to LGBTQIA rights and trans rights specifically. Like we don't have everything. Like I'm going to the legislature on Wednesday to say, hey, let's modernize our birth certificate process. Let's make it so that people don't have to get like sign off from a medical provider saying that they're trans. Let's make it so that it's easier for trans parents with kids to update their own information on their kids' birth certificates. And let's make it possible for non-binary Marylanders to get X markers on their birth certificates. So we're doing all the three of those things in one bill that's being heard on Wednesday. So part of my today was drafting up the testimony for that, or revising it, because I had iterations of it from prior years. So that's one thing that we're still working on. But there's a lot of stuff that we have in place already. We have non-discrimination rules that cover gender identity and sexual orientation. We have, the hate crime law and all sorts of things. And we've abolished the trans panic defense a few years ago, which was the fact that people could go in and be like, oh, I panicked when I found out this person was, gay or trans, and so I straight up murdered them, and then, have their crime reduced from murder to manslaughter. Was a little disturbing, but yeah, we got that repealed. I mean, there wasn't a specific trans panic defense. It was like there was a general it fell under a general manslaughter exception. I'm not going to bore you with criminal law details, but yeah. Oh, hey, look, it's Lily. Hi, Lily. I'm really just rambling and talking about random shit that we've done before.
Hey, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. I think there's going to be a switch on your microphone. I'm going to let Lily introduce herself.
Hey y'all, is this on?
It should be.
That's okay.
It should be on.
Oh, I think.
Do you see a green light?
Yes, it's blinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey y'all, my name's Lily. I use she, her pronouns. I actually just graduated from Anne Arundel Community College from the nursing program. Oh, thank you. That was it. I wasn't trying to. Woo! But so I'm going to be starting at the University of Maryland Medical Center downtown location in the Shock Trauma Center. And I used to work for Trans Maryland. I'm so sorry. Honestly, I don't know your campus well. So I didn't realize I parked like really far away.
There was also like a accident right over here. Did you get caught up in that? Because I definitely
So, yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm late.
That's the excuse I gave for you, at least.
Also, I moved this weekend. I'm just a little discombobulated.
So Lily and I first worked together back in, was it 2018, 2019 on the driver's license bill?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we first worked together a number of years ago to make it easier to change your gender marker on Maryland driver's licenses and to specifically allow an X gender marker. We got that passed in 2019. And so we spent a lot of time together in the State House then. And yeah, it's always nice to see you.
Sorry, I'm late.
No, you're fine, you're fine. Yeah, so we've gotten a lot of things passed, and like Maryland, like we have a sanctuary bill that passed, and there's a protected health care bill that says that the state won't share like information about, well, it goes beyond transition-related care. It also covers like abortion and other reproductive care. They won't share that information with other states if like they get a subpoena. But there's a lot of uncertainty as to how all of this like works with the new federal structure. I'm sure some of you or all of you have heard about the litany of executive orders over the past couple of weeks, especially targeting trans folks. There was, let me see, I'm gonna just try to name off some of them. There was one telling the entire government to stop recognizing anything more than biological sex at birth. That was phrased in a ridiculous way that actually suggested that all humans are female. Did you all see this? Yeah. Really funny stuff, but also terrifying. But we at least got a little bit of laughter out of it, because it was like, oh hey, we're all female now apparently. I don't think that's what you meant to do. It was not what they meant to do. So there was that one. There was the attempt to ban transition-related health care for anyone under 19, which was a bold choice of age. Because aren't 18-year-olds adults? That's what I've been told. That's when I got to vote, and I could have theoretically bought cigarettes. And I don't know what else I could have done at 18. What are other things I could do at 18, Lily? Lily is opting out of answering that. And then I think the most recent one was about schools and attempting to tell schools everywhere that if they do anything to support trans kids that they're gonna lose funding. Now the interesting thing is pretty much all of these executive orders, they're just the president kind of saying, hey, we should do this thing. But they don't really have effect in and of themselves. So there's some examples where like the agency in charge of whatever that thing was then acted quickly to do it. So almost immediately after that first executive order, we saw the Department of State say, oh, we're no longer accepting gender markers on passports, or accepting changes in gender markers on passports, and we're no longer going to issue X gender markers on passports. This decision came so quick, like we knew this was coming, but it came so quickly that actually there were a lot of people at the national level who were like, oh, that's faster than we thought it would be. We thought they'd have to like rewrite the regulations, but they didn't do that. They just were like, we're gonna stop and then rewrite the regulations later. The Social Security Administration, on the other hand, I know I'm talking about like government agencies that you don't care about. What? You'll care about the Social Security Administration in like 50 years when you're like, where's my check? No, but they took a little longer. Well, so they got the same order, that was like, hey, stop changing gender markers. And they sort of, they took a little while to do a couple of changes on Friday, which were basically like deleting references to like certain gender related things in their like manual. But apparently they haven't changed the actual rules anywhere. And so depending on where you go and who you get when you go to Social Security, like they may or may not change your gender marker because the manual says you can do it, but this email from someone who, may have been given an email address by Elon Musk, says don't do that. And so, if you're a federal worker and you're like, well, there's the manual or there's Elon Musk's email, which should I listen to? There's a lot of people who are like looking at the manual. Now, again, we expect that to change at some point. They're going to fix that manual. I mean, I say fix, but ruin. They're going to ruin that manual. But in the meantime, there's this sort of like uncertainty. And like the Social Security Administration, the Department of State, those are places where like changes can be made quickly. When we're talking about like the Department of Health and Human Services, which is in charge of like Medicaid programs, health insurance programs, et cetera. Also grants to like universities for various scientific medical research. When we're talking about HHS, it's a much different process. Like they have to go through like a sometimes years long like process to like change rules and like submit them to the public for comment. And then the public has time to say, oh, we think this is a terrible rule. And then they have to respond to those comments saying that it's terrible. And they can do this thing where they're like, there's 4,000 people that said it was terrible because of like this specific thing. And so we're only answering that comment once. But they still have to answer it, which is fun. And it's a great way to delay things. I mean, the other side uses it also to delay our stuff when we try to get good regulations, but their comments are much more likely to be like, trans people suck. And then, it'll be like 15,000 people said trans people suck. That's not substantive to the regulation. Whereas our comments are more like, here are all these medical associations that say that, transition-related care improves health outcomes for trans people. And, here's all this evidence and blah, 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 blah. And then they have to try to pretend that that evidence doesn't exist. But it does, because we just gave it to them in a big-ass memo. Yeah. So the executive order on healthcare was like very frightening to a lot of people when it came down. But it's not, as we say in the law, self-executing. It doesn't like enforce itself. It has to be something else that's done in order to make it enforceable. And those things are going to take a long time. So as it stands, like people still have access to healthcare legally. But what we're seeing, which is kind of terrifying, is there are some providers who are like, oh, there's this executive order, and we're worried that if we don't immediately preemptively comply with it, that the president is going to be mad at us, and maybe we'll lose some grant funding down the line or something. And so that you've seen some providers like cancel appointments and stuff, and it's really disappointing because, again, executive order is not itself like legally enforceable. But it's also just like sad to see so many of our like allies just sort of fold and say, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Maybe we don't want to deal with this problem. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a similar issue that's not like queer policy related, but my wife is a professor at a university in DC, and the grants like office at the university sent out an email that was like, if you have any grants that you have a like DEI component to, immediately stop doing that part of it. Now the thing is, like grants are given out like for you to do a specific thing, and then like if they want to remove DEI things from grants, they'll have to do that to the future grants. Like you can't change an existing thing that the government has already said we're giving you this money. And so, yeah, so she literally was like, they're telling me that I need to like do this, but I don't even know what that would mean. And then like we were talking through it, and she was like, you know, like at the time that I wrote this grant, it was like, oh, I'm going, get asked how it was going to like serve underserved communities, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, so I specifically had it like, you know, going to this, you know, one like middle school that was like, you know, the demographics were blah, blah, blah. But she's like, but honestly, I kind of also selected that because it's the middle school my stepdaughter goes to. And so she's like, so does that count? Does that not count? You know, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, but that's the sort of like preemptive compliance that we're seeing like with the Trump administration at the moment. You know, where companies, universities, healthcare providers, etc., anyone who has like money in the game is like tempted to just be like, okay, yeah, no, we're gonna do what you say. On the other hand, you know, we do have like a number of nonprofit organizations, advocacy organizations that are like pushing back. So, you know, I had conversations with one of our national partners over the weekend, so many texts, about like litigation around the healthcare executive order, specifically around the like trying to get an injunction specifically focused on this isn't enforceable, but you saying it has caused people to have their appointments canceled. And so, in theory, there's a lawsuit being filed very soon, but I can't give all the details on that because I don't have them. But yeah, I've been talking for a while. Lily, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I was going to say that's really nice that there are actually lawsuits being filed, and I don't know. I mean, that's an important thing I think for all of us to remember, that a lot of the legal processes do take a really long time.
Yeah, the downside. I'm sorry, I'm a real bummer today. But the downside is that our judiciary is stacked with so many right-wing judges, especially on the Supreme Court, that, yeah, we don't know. That even legal arguments that would have been clear winners like 12 minutes ago, you know, they're up in the air now. And we've seen that shift sort of, you know, since the early 2010s with like, the judiciary just giving voice to legal arguments that would have been seen as completely preposterous in the past. And that started at least as early as like the Obamacare decisions of, you know, when you were all like 3. I'm exaggerating.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the Maryland judiciary?
Yeah, the Maryland judiciary is a lot better. I don't really have a lot to say about the judiciary. Oh, we have been doing work with the judiciary to improve some of the background rules and things. And there is a working group that the judiciary has put together on, they say family law issues, but that's sort of where, in addition to actual family law issues, they lump like name changes and like all the trans stuff. And we're going to be trying to further improve that process behind the scenes, make it easier for people who get their names changed to seal the cases, so that like it won't just be searchable on the internet. Trying to make some improvements to like the second parent adoption process and other things. Yeah. I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to actually maybe open it up to you all to see what you want to know from me, or from Lily. Lily's here too.
I'm not a lawyer though. You have nursing questions. If any of you are in nursing school, I'm happy to talk about nursing school.
Do we have any nursing questions for Lily?
Obviously, that's not what we're
This is your
doing, but
chance.
Just always happy to talk about it.
Ask Lily about nursing. No? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so folks, who wants to ask something or say something or share how you're feeling or whatever? What can you do on an individual level as students to help people being discriminated against? Call out the person doing that discrimination. Like, don't just let that shit fly. Like, if it's safe. Although that then brings into question, like, how safe is it for the person being discriminated against? But, it's like, it's tempting in this environment to just sort of like, be like, I'm gonna go hide under a rock for 4 years and see what happens. But if we don't, like, stand up, if we don't get out from under our rock and we just hide out for 4 years, then, like, all the stuff that we're afraid will happen while we're under the rock. But if we get up and we, I'm not going to say pick up that rock and like threaten people with it, but I'm also not saying that. If we don't at least get up from behind the rock and say, hey, this isn't cool, and we should be better than this, then if we do that, then there's a chance that some of those worst things might not happen.
I think also recognizing where we have power in situations. I don't know anything about your school, but if it's happening in the context of the school in any way, it's very possible that there are professors or administrators who could be really helpful for that. I think we're in, what is this building? This is like a health, you'll have a...
It was like a counseling center or
Health
something?
and counseling center.
Yes.
Yeah. In my experience, health and counseling people are amazing. They are really great people and absolutely really do genuinely want to help and will be very, very supportive and can help you identify resources that might exist that you wouldn't know about. I mean, I think that's one of the issues that a lot of people run into when trying to suggest, like, oh, how do you get involved? How do you help in a specific situation? Well, it's going in many cases to be based on where you're at, what your social networks are, and what your environment is, what institutions you're a part of and connected to.
And I will say that while I'm sure this particular health and wellness center is the counseling center, it's fabulous and that you're all great. I am going to put a little qualifier there, which is like, there has been a history of like counseling being used in not great ways with queer people and people of color, and so it can be great. It can also perpetuate systems of power. So I just wanted to name that.
No, that's very true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's always a tough thing when attempting to deal with any of these big monster institutions. There are many motivating forces that are affecting larger institutions. If you're talking about a government, if you're talking about a school, it can be really hard. I'm not going to get into it, but obviously, like Johns Hopkins has done some pretty awful things.
What?
For many decades and very, very recently, Johns Hopkins has done some awful things. So, right? Hard to believe.
I know, it's shocking. It is absolutely shocking. Other questions? Passports, they've already changed the policy so that if you have not already changed your passport, they're not going to change the gender marker on it. They're going to insist that it matches whatever your gender marker was at birth. Now, there's potentially some ways around it in some ways, but I'll get into that in a second. Now, if you've already changed your gender marker on your passport, so like you went in before January 20th, whether that was 5 years ago or this year, and you got your gender marker changed, they're not revoking those passports. So you still have your passport, you can still travel with it, regardless of what gender marker it is. Now, when it comes up for renewal, we're not clear what's happening yet. Very likely, well, this is this interesting, sort of scenario where it's like, if this policy stays in place for like 8 more years, then at some point you'll have someone who has an X marker on their passport, whose passport expires. And then they would then have to decide, what they're using instead of an X. They didn't start issuing X markers on passports until a couple of years ago, and passports are usually valid for 10 years. So if you have an X marker in your passport and you're older than 18, then it's not going to be an issue for a while. Now, for folks with binary gender markers, M's or F's, that changed it from something previously, it's not clear that they have a way to check that in their system. So, when my passport expires in like 7 years or something like that, if this policy is still in place, they wouldn't have any way of knowing that previously there was a different marker. At least not with the way that their system is built now. They might possibly require more documentation at the time of renewal. They might possibly build out their system in different ways to like cross-check things. But as it is now, I could easily renew my passport and keep that marker. Now, again, there's a decent chance they're going to build out those systems over the next few years if these policies continue. Now, the one group that they're sort of like, oh, this is an interesting opportunity, is people who don't have passports yet, who have changed all of their other documentation so that their birth certificate has, their correct gender identity on it, their name has been changed on everything, it's like everything matches who they are. In theory, you can submit that to the Department of State, and they'll have no way of knowing whatsoever that you changed things. Now, technically, somewhere in the regulations, it says that you're supposed to tell them what your birth certificate said at the time of your birth, but I can tell you that people don't always do that, and it's an easy thing to overlook, and so realistically, if you've gotten everything changed before you apply for your passport for the first time, you're probably going to be okay. So that's sort of answer that part of the question. And then what was the other part?
Just about Medicaid.
Yeah, so Medicaid is interesting because it's handled by the state. Like, there's federal funding, but the program goes through the state, and we have actually a really fabulous state law in Maryland called the Trans Health Equity Act that was passed 2 years ago, a year and a half, I don't know. So it was either a year or 2 ago. 2 years ago, I think.
Part of it.
And I do see your hand, so I'm going to come back there in a second. So yeah, it was passed a couple of years ago, and it basically requires the state of Maryland to cover transition-related care under its Medicaid program. And it actually goes above and beyond sort of like the bare bones coverage that you see in a lot of like state Medicaid programs. It says, oh, not only do you have to cover like, treatment in general, but there's these very specific things that must be covered. And so we have a fascinating situation where Maryland state law requires that the Medicaid program pay for these things. But we're soon going to have a situation where the federal government is like, we're not paying for them. So in theory, the state will have to make up for that funding shortfall. At the end of the day, if the state doesn't have money, it doesn't have money, and we'll potentially see issues there. But Medicaid is the part of the healthcare system I'm actually the least worried about in Maryland because of that. Now, other benefits, for the most part, we shouldn't see significant hits on people because they're trans, but there may be some, we're going to see some like knock-on effects of things. Like the obsession with attacking like anything perceived as DEI includes anything that's designed to assist people with disabilities. And because we have a very ableist president at the moment. I think part of his rant about DEI causing the airline crash was this idea that somehow someone with a disability had been hired at like the air traffic control office. Like it was, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, not ridiculous that someone with a disability be hired, but that somehow caused a crash. Yeah, so we may see like effects, things that end up affecting the community that come down, but they're not there yet. I did see a hand over here. Okay. So, is there a website to go to like update your information with the government? So there's not like a single place to go. So if you want to change your name, you'll do that through the Maryland courts. And actually, Trans Maryland has a excellent identity documents program where we assist people through this process. Lily, do you have is there like a website or something that they go to?
I was thinking the same thing.
Is it transmaryland.org and then you go to like identity documents? Yeah. And then you will be put in touch with someone who can talk you through the process. Now, the name change process is pretty straightforward. You file a petition with the court, and you say, this is the name I want to change to, and then you pay a fee. And after about a month and a half, you get back a court order that says, hey, your name is now, whatever your new name is. Now, the gender markers, it's different for like every document. And there's some things where it's really easy, like changing your gender marker on your Maryland state driver's license is super duper easy. You just go to the Motor Vehicle Administration and you say, hey, I want to change the gender marker on my license. And they're like, sexy. And then they push a little button and a thing comes up on a screen where you like have 3 choices and you're like, ooh, I'm unspecified or other. And then, or you can say male or female, but unspecified or other is the sexiest of the options. And then they mail you a new license that will come, in like 2 weeks or something. Transmaryland.org, and yeah, you can get information there, and you can get hooked up with our folks who help people with this stuff. Yeah, so driver's licenses are easy. Maryland birth certificates are a little bit less easy. We're trying to make them easier. That's going to go into the legislature for on Wednesday. The federal stuff is a mess right now. Generally, it doesn't matter if the gender markers on all of your documents match. Like, you can collect all 3.
I was going to ask, can you kind of speak to that as the federal government gets more complicated?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's fine if you have different gender markers on different things. So I was born in Indiana, which makes it very hard to update your birth certificates. So I just never have in any way, shape, or form. Like, it's really ridiculous. Like, I have like multiple names that go like on this birth certificate because my grandfather decided when I was born to immediately rename me. And so, yeah, so there was a name on my birth certificate that I was never called by anyone except for like gym teachers in the first day of class. And it was always the gym teachers who were like, wait, you're called by something other than this? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, are you sure? And I was like, yes, I'm sure. The other teachers would be like, oh yeah, cool, okay, yeah, great. We'll just write down Charlie. But the gym teachers were like, that seems sketch. And I'm like, look, I know you're paid the big bucks here, but it's not sketch. I see a hand. So Maryland laws protect us until the point that we have basically like a Supreme Court order saying, no, federal law is trumping this. Now, how long that will take on various issues is a good question. But like there will probably be a decision at there will probably be a case at some point that raises the issue of sanctuary states and how much states like Maryland can refuse to cooperate with investigations from other states. Now, there's definitely going to be an issue at some point with the federal government trying to subpoena that same sort of data, because when those laws were passed, they were anticipating, Texas or West Virginia or something, subpoenaing medical records, not like the Trump administration subpoenaing them. So how they're going to stand up to federal subpoenas and federal investigations is an interesting question. Definitely, the state AG has been suggesting that they're not going to just hand things over, they're going to fight. We're probably going to see litigation that's going to go on for quite a long time on that front. But at some point we'll have some cases that put these things into concrete terms and that make their way through the courts. And then how long that takes depends on how apt the conservatives on the Supreme Court are to do things like, I don't know if you're all familiar with the term the shadow docket. Shadow docket. It's this like extreme inside Supreme Court thing where it's like the justices, like usually they hear a case in a certain way where it's like they get the appeal and they decide like, should we hear this case or not, and they vote, and then there's then months where people are writing briefs to them saying you should vote this way or that way, or this is what the law should be. And then they have oral arguments and people get up and start to say, so this is what, and then even before they can finish their sentence, the judges start asking them questions like, Lily, what about this thing? Wouldn't that be a problem under your theory of the law? And then Lily over there is like, oh my God, no, it wouldn't, because of this thing I just made up right now. But so usually and then after the oral arguments, then they like write out the opinions over, again, a months long process where they share them between, all 9 offices, and, people make comments and they rewrite things, and then there's dissents and all this, and it takes like, years. And this is most Supreme Court cases, but over the last few years, they've been using this thing called the shadow docket, where instead of accepting cases for, the technical term is certiorari, which is basically appeal to the Supreme Court. Instead of accepting cases through that way, they instead see the like petition and they're like, oh, we have moonlighting. Instead, they see those petitions and they say, we're just going to rule on this now without a formal hearing, without briefing, without anything. We're just going to issue a ruling that doesn't even have a full decision. It just says, you win, you lose. And they've been doing this in a lot of like rights-based issues over the past few years in a way that has been consistently like placing the thumb of the judiciary on the side of like right-wing groups. And so there's a decent chance that there's a lot of these issues that are never even going to be fully litigated. We'll just be getting like, sort of Supreme Court shadow docket rulings that say, oh, we're upholding, this complete insanity that the Fifth Circuit, ruled on or something, without ever justifying it. So that's the terrifying thing. So yeah, Maryland law will protect us until it doesn't. And then, what do we do then? Who knows? Because
it sounds like the sort of thing where like we could have some warning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we should have some warning. And okay, I'm going to tell you something that I told someone the other day. I did see a hand there, and I'm going to come to you in a minute. But and this is both to assuage fears and to be like, no, but the risk is real. So I had someone the other day ask me, so like, do we need to be worried about like, a genocide focused at trans people? And I was like, well, if we do nothing, if we just sort of, let policies go the direction they're going, and they keep going in that direction, and they keep like moving on and on in that direction, then that's where it'll land. But that's not an inevitability. That's a, like, if we do nothing. So, we need to stand up and fight. Technically, she was asking, like, should I move out of the country now? Or, and I was like, you can. You have to make the decision for yourself. But, like, if everyone just sort of preemptively gives up, then, like, there'll be no one left to fight. But one of the points I made was, like, you don't go, I hate making the Holocaust analysis here, but like the Nazi government didn't go from like, election day one to mass murder, genocide of like Jewish peoples, in the space of a week. It was like a 10-year project. And there were a lot of things along those 10 years that, things got increasingly worse at all points. And so, the fact that we're seeing things getting worse does mean that, hey, there's the possibility of something happening later. But it also means there's going to be a lot of opportunities for us along the way to say, oh, I should get out of here. So you don't have to, feel like you have to flee now, because, you probably got 10 years. Sorry, Gallows Humor. Yeah, I'm going to take that question.
If you're from a different state but are coming to college in Maryland, do any of the rights apply to you?
Yeah, so pretty much almost all of them will apply to you. So as a resident of the state, which you are as a college student who's living here, all of those protections will apply to you. The only things that won't are things like, since if you're not born in Maryland, then Maryland can't issue you a new birth certificate. That will be up to the state where you were born. There are going to be, certain federal issues that come up over time, but those are going to be the same case regardless of whether you're in Maryland or another state. But by virtue of being a resident of Maryland, you are protected. And it's one of the, we're seeing a lot of people moving here because of horrifying policies in other states, especially like families with trans kids.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head what the requirements are for a driver's license here? Like how long you have to live here?
They're effectively, there is technically like a minimum, like you have to have been here by like 30 days or something like that, but it's, if you go and apply for a driver's license and say I live here, and you have like a document that shows your address, then you're never going to be asked, like, have you lived here for 30 days? Because literally, like, what's required is you just have to establish residency, which is just like being like, I live here now. So yeah, you should be able to get that license, like, as long as you have something to prove your address. But yeah, it isn't like you have to wait like 3 years, or you have to finish college first or something. Like, you're a resident of Maryland already, regardless of where you came from. You can register to vote here. I encourage you all to do so if you haven't. You can get your driver's license here. I encourage you all to do if you haven't. And you can do all the fun things that Marylanders can do, like, I don't know, season things with Old Bay.
Well, and you can get an X on your driver's license as well. At least
season your driver's license with Old Bay. Yeah.
What about Maryland Medicaid?
Medicaid does have more of a waiting period, but I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It is, well, so Medicaid is like a weird, like, federal state hybrid program. And this goes back to like 1960s racism, really. So Medicare was like, they're like, oh, we'll do one program for everyone who's over, 65 to cover their health insurance. And then, they're like, oh, and we're also going to do a program to cover health insurance for like poor people. And then you immediately had some white bigots in southern states who were like, oh, no, we can't start paying for health insurance for like poor people because you know what that means. And then, they like said a bunch of racist slurs and stuff. So they ended up as this compromise in the 60s, basically saying, okay, so Medicaid, it's going to be up to the states. We'll give you money to do this stuff, but it's going to be like a state program that has some federal restrictions. So you apply for Medicaid through the state manages it. Every state does it differently, and Maryland's program is actually a lot better than a lot of others when it comes to trans care, in part because of the work we did. But yeah, but there is some sort of, you have to have been here for a certain amount of time before you become eligible, but I don't remember exactly how long it is. Yeah. Yes. Not the microphone.
So I know it was asked earlier, what steps can we take as individuals to keep trans spaces safe? But is there anything we can do in terms of legal voice or things like that? Like just going beyond, hey, what you're doing is wrong. What else can we do?
Oh, there's.
Do you want to talk about the legislature?
Yeah. So, talk to your legislators. Definitely talk to your federal legislators and be like, this is some bullshit. Because we've seen some things that the federal Democrats have already done to kind of sell out trans people 12 seconds after the election. You may have heard about this defense spending bill that was passed late last year, where basically Republicans added in a rider that said that no money associated with the bill would be spent on transition-related care. And Democrats were like, okay, sure, yeah, we'll go along with that because we have to pass the defense spending bill because God forbid the military not have $800 trillion. So they already compromised on that, and we're already seeing the effects of the VA healthcare and TRICARE, cutting out coverage for transition-related care. So not great. So definitely talk to your federal reps and be like, hey, this is an important issue. You can't compromise on this because this is very much like is Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football too dated a reference? Does that, okay. So, it's Lucy is oh, Charlie Brown, I promise this time I'm gonna hold the football in place while you kick it. And then Charlie Brown's like, no, you're not. You're lying. You're gonna move it. You always move it. And she's like, no, this time it's gonna stay there. And he's like, okay. And he gets his, his running start and he goes running and his feet are going back and forth. And then right at the last second, she pulls the ball out and his foot goes high into the air. You're really missing this if you're only hearing the audio. And then he falls on his back and is like, I knew you were gonna do that. And that is Democrats trying to compromise with Republicans on trans rights. It's the football is always pulled out. We just want to make sure that there's protections for blah 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 blah. And they're oh, okay, that sounds reasonable. But then as soon as they do that, then it's oh, actually, we also want to do this other thing. And it's oh, that sounds reasonable. Oh, and then here's a third thing. And then it's never actually just the thing they said they wanted. Not to be hyper partisan. It's just we also see conservative Democrats do the same thing, I'll say. And there are a number of conservative Democrats in the state. So yeah, on the federal level, make sure that your legislators know that you care about this issue and that they can't just sell out the trans community because, it won't stop with whatever they're doing at that second. But also pay attention to what's going on in the state legislature.
The Maryland General Assembly is in
Yeah.
session right now.
Yeah. And we do have, a number of bills that affect the trans community that we are both supporting and opposing, depending on, what they do. So, like I said, I'm there on Wednesday about this birth certificate thing. I'm also going to be there, sometime in the very near future about trans people playing sports. And that's going to be a shit show of a hearing because...
Is that one of the sponsor only bills?
Well, so it was in the House, but the Senate cross-file, we're trying to see if we can get it limited, but it's not yet listed as sponsored.
Well, I was just going to say also, if you go to transmaryland.org, they have a legislative tracker that has bills for this session, and it has some basic information about them, as well as kind of their position on them.
Yeah. You can see how I arbitrarily ranked things between
Oh yeah, in a ranking system.
mid, high, and highest.
But do you want to talk about the sponsor only bill concept?
Oh.
Because I think that this is, every year at this point we see, I don't know, they get called different things, the defend women's sports bills, whatever they call them.
I think this
But,
one's Save Women's Sports.
Save women's sports, whatever they call them. But it's always the same bill. It's essentially banning trans feminine people from women's sports.
Yeah.
It's generally targeted here in the state. The strategy they use is they start with children and then they kind of move their way up. So I think this one also, it's youth sports, right?
So we did have this wonderful thing that happened when I was in the House. So they bring this bill every year, and it's defeated every year. And so in the House this year, the House Ways and Means Committee, it's really fascinating how there's a lot of people who only care about sports or who only care about women's sports when there's potentially a trans person involved. But otherwise, if you try to talk to them about the WNBA or something, they'd be like, ugh. Or the huge number of British men who think they could beat Serena Williams at tennis, or and it's like, I'm sorry, my bro, that's not happening. But yeah, it's gendered because it has been gendered, and there's push to have some unisex leagues, but usually things through schools aren't, and it's weird, and it goes well beyond this. Yeah. But there was this lovely thing that the chair of the Maryland House Ways and Means Committee did, where she made the hearing for the Save Women's Sports Act sponsor only. So only the anti-trans legislator who introduced it was able to testify, instead of every anti-trans person in the state. Now, when it comes to the Senate hearing, we're not sure if that same thing's going to happen. We've been pushing to try to get a similar restriction on the hearing, so that it doesn't just become an anti-trans circus. But
because that is a big part of the point of those bills at this point.
Yeah.
The Maryland General Assembly, Democrats have a supermajority.
Yes.
So supermajority. Yeah, they have a supermajority, and we have a Democrat in the governor as well. Wes Moore. So none of these bills have any chance of actually passing. They're almost entirely just an excuse. It's a fundraising effort, it's that kind of stuff. But a large part of it really is just an excuse for these Republicans to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so by making the bill a sponsor-only panel, they are denied one of the big opportunities that they would have, where they would be able to sit in front of all of their peers and talk at great length and bring a bunch of other people on to talk at great length and, as Charlotte said, make kind of a big circus of it. So.
Yeah, they want the circus. They want the media to, pick it up and be like, oh, there's controversy in Maryland about, girls' sports in high schools, and, should trans girls be able to compete? And, the fascinating thing is that if you actually dig into it, it's like, okay, what are we actually talking about here? What is the number of, trans girls on the national level who are actually competitive in sports in any real way, that they would somehow be taking, things away from some cis girl or whatever, even if like we consider that an issue. Because as you say, like, why aren't these things just unisex anyway? And the number is like less than 10. And, there's a reason why, like, the media tends to focus on, like, the one trans girl who's maybe doing okay in sports at any given moment. Whether it's Leah, what's her last name?
Thomas.
There we go, yeah, Leah Thomas. Or, the last trans girl who was good at sports. Or, the trans boy from Texas that they thought was a trans girl and made compete against the girls, and then he won, and then they were like, oh my God, this boy is like eviscerating all of the girl wrestlers. How could this happen? The left is gone too far with its wokeness. And the poor kid is like, I want to compete with the boys, I'm a boy. And the state is like, no, a doctor said you were female when you were born. You can only wrestle with the girls. But like literally, like the photo of this kid was like in every like anti-trans like email for like 10 years. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Are we out of time?
We have about 10 minutes, but if you want to...
We have how much?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, awesome. I had no idea how much time we had, because I was trying not to look at my phone and be like, oh, I have better things to do here. Yeah, so other questions? You can also just be like, okay, you've talked enough, Charlotte. Oh, here we go.
So I'm a staff member, I work at the library, and I'm wondering, we talked about like what can we as individuals do, what can we do with our legislators. Is there anything that you've seen maybe in other states where they do not have great laws that protect people? Are there organizational things that we can do or things that libraries can do? Like, is there information that people need? Is there ways that people can like form networks or provide services or care for each other beyond just like you're an individual, go call your representative?
Yeah, so I get actually this question a lot about what's the best way to help people in other states. And a lot of the answer is going to come down, for most people, the answer is going to come down to reach out to the orgs working in those other states and see what they need. Sometimes I hear people who are like, I'm going to create a new, it's like every time Silicon Valley reinvents the bus, it's like, what if we had a car that like could get a lot of people somewhere fast, like it would pick up multiple people at different places, and like there would be like a schedule, like, and
Disruptive.
yeah, we'll disrupt things. Or the time that Elon Musk was like, I'm gonna build a tunnel. Sorry, I keep talking about Elon Musk, but it's just because he's like
Just on the brain right now.
he's the most annoying person alive.
No, but that's a really good point, Charlotte.
That Elon Musk is the most annoying person alive.
that you want to connect with the organizations that are there doing the work.
And so, anyway, so the point I was making was, I've had people, come up to me like, oh, what if we build up, this thing, and we put resources in other states and blah blah blah. And it's like a lot of times those things are already in place.
Yeah. And there are people with years and years of experience who can help guide you on the process.
You saw this a lot in the immediate aftermath of the repeal of Roe. Where people were like, oh, we need to set up like abortion funds in all these states. But all those states already had abortion.
Exist.
Yeah. Abortion funds already existed everywhere. And so it was like, find the local abortion fund and like, give them resources, assist with them,
Yeah, there are a lot of states in this country have something along the lines of Trans Maryland.
Yeah.
Something that is their statewide trans org. There's also pride centers in like major cities, that are really instrumental in the organizing in a lot of other cities.
So that's part of it. Specifically as a librarian, we're seeing a lot of bullshit around libraries across the country. There was even a bill here in Maryland. I mean, it didn't go anywhere, but there was a bill to restrict sexually explicit material from public school libraries. And but it's like, oh, who decides if it's sexually explicit? And oh, isn't it amazing that sexually explicit seems to mean has queer content? What a weird coincidence. So whenever you see stuff like that, it's important to talk about how important having access to these materials is to, library patrons, etc. But it's also important to do things like, send out those interlibrary loans when you get requests from someone in Texas that's like trying to get a copy of, sexually explicit material for Minors Monthly.
I also want to bring up two other ones that are kind of, to some extent, specific to libraries, but a little more general as well. I think there's some concern that there's going to be some amount of censorship or borderline censorship, making it more difficult to access certain types of data. So if, for example, there are websites that have information that you find really, really valuable, that's something that we could squirrel away. So, for example, information about, I'm not endorsing this, I'm just mentioning this as a thing, transgender people doing DIY hormones. There's a lot of great information about that on the internet, and that information might disappear. So, it might be worth holding on to that. Yeah.
The other thing that occurs to me is, if you don't already know, figure out how to use like the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive and figure out how to tell people how to use it, because there is stuff being scrubbed from federal websites like every day now. And so, looking at the version of that website from, December of 2024 versus today, you would be able to see dramatically different information in a lot of cases. So, figuring out how to find that information that's being scrubbed is big. I think we have another question over here.
And I know I'm just asking you to guess.
No. So
how long might it last?
This is definitely something that has been talked about extensively among the national orgs. So I will say that I feel like we're going to have a period where the Bostock decision, which prohibited employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity under the Civil Rights Act, that we are probably going to have a period where formally the decision remains in place, but we're going to see chipping away at it from every direction. And so, the decision itself had disclaimers in it that's like, oh, we're not making a decision about, bathrooms, or about, they had another thing that they were like, we're not ruling on this today in it. But so they explicitly said, we're not saying anything about, whether, non-discrimination against, trans people means that, you have to let them use the bathroom associated with their gender identity. So that's a place where they're gonna chip away at it immediately. We're also going to see the courts, the Supreme Court saying, oh, well, that's just a Title VII of the Civil Rights Act decision. It's not a Title IX of the Equal Education Amendments Act of 1972, 3, whatever it was. It's not a Title IX decision, even though every prior decision that we've had has said that, sex discrimination under Title VII and, sex discrimination under Title IX, they're, interpreted the same way. But no, we're gonna say it's different here because the purpose is different. And so, they're going to chip away at it there. They're going to chip away at it at other places. And so I think that the fundamental decision of Bostock is going to remain in place for a while. that's probably going to be one of the latter things that they try to overturn. But all of the extremely rational extensions of it, all of the implications of it that everyone drew from the decision itself, the court is going to be saying, oh no, that's not what we meant. I think what's possibly more at risk more immediately are the marriage decisions, because that never really had a full buy-in from the conservatives on the court. And so there's definitely some who are itching to repeal those, but that's the less popular thing for them to repeal. It's just like, so I don't know. I think mostly what we'll end up seeing is extreme religious exemptions to everything. So, oh yeah, there's a non-discrimination law, but it doesn't apply if, your religion says that, the gays are of the devil.